We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.
So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes? I wonder.
Hello! It is Sunday, October 16th, 2022, and this is the Atheist Experience. I am Shannon Q, your host today, and I am here with my arch nemesis, Kenneth Leonard. Kenneth, say hello to the people.
Hello, people. Hello. I adore Shannon. I don't know what she's talking about with this nemesis stuff.
Yes, you do. You do.
All right,
Yes, you do. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, uh-huh. We'll see.
I
We'll
know
see.
what I did.
You know what you did. We don't need to tell anybody else. You can go, the history's on YouTube. You can go find all of our arguments on YouTube. Nobody needs to know any more than that. Say no more.
We've said too much.
We've already said too much. I'm very excited to be co-hosting the show today with you, even though we are arch nemesis, but that's okay. That's okay. We are going to get past that. We are going to be professional, and we are going to start taking some calls. Are you ready? Can you handle it?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
All right. Let's go. Let us talk to... Well, we'll talk to Mark first. Hello, Mark. You were on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, what a pleasure. I just called in and you guys take my call, the first call. Amazing. And my two favorite hosts are hosting today. So thanks for taking the call.
Oh.
I listen to you guys all the time, and it's the first time I ever called in. So, but it's a topic that I have wanted to talk to you guys about for a long time. Can I just dive right into it?
Please do.
So I'm an atheist, and basically everybody in my family is atheist, except inexplicably my niece, my oldest brother's daughter, and she is a full-on evangelical Christian. And unfortunately, she also has two children, which she's raising in this environment. So ever since these kids were born, I have planned, when they turned 18, to send them a loving, well-reasoned letter and some excellent books on this subject. And so the advice I want from you guys is I'm trying to figure out a good hook for the beginning of this letter to get it so this 18-year-old kid who's been raised in this environment and I'm sure truly believes all the things his parents taught him, to make it so he doesn't immediately dismiss me as a, devil worshiping atheist who just wants to have him burn in hell. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. It does.
And
yeah,
so basically what I'm looking for here is a couple of really good airtight kind of wake up arguments for this kid, for him to go, oh, this is interesting. I might look into this further. If you were in my position, what would you say to him in the first paragraph?
I'm interested in what Kenneth would have to say, because we may differ slightly, but do you want to go first, Kenneth? Or?
I would lead with Philippians 4:8. I would quote from the Bible that what believers are supposed to be focusing on, first and foremost, is whatever is true. So I would lead with,
okay.
We have different ideas about what is true, but we both value what is true. Okay. And in the book that your religion is derived from, you're explicitly given the instruction that you should be focused on thinking on whatever is true. So how do we get at what is true? And I would lead with that,
mm-hmm.
and let them know. I mean, as the saying goes, the truth has nothing to fear from investigation. Let them know that you want to believe true things. So if what they believe is
mm-hmm.
true, you want to come on board. But I firmly believe that making the conversation about the methodology of how do we figure out what is true in the first place is probably your best way in.
I like that advice.
That's
I have
excellent
a,
advice. Yeah, that's great advice.
I have a slightly different perspective relating to how to interact on that level. So the same way that we would receive somebody proselytizing to us to attempt to convert us with like this, whoa, like that's boundary crossing, like what are you doing? That's the same
Yeah.
way that somebody who has a different perspective is going to receive it if you jump out of the gate with, you know, basically you're wrong, here's the reasons why, I'm right, here's the reasons why sort of approach. I always think that the relationships matter first and foremost, especially when it comes to family. So, first, I would take the temperature of how it's going to be received based on, I mean, this is years and years and years from now, based on what you're saying. So, I would take the temperature of how it's going to be received at the time. But ultimately, it would be, to me, about helping somebody understand my perspective better so that they could understand me better so that we could strengthen the relationship if that's something that we even need to talk about in the relationship. I don't think as atheists, our goal needs to be to deconvert anybody and bring them over to our side, as it were, so that they can be, you know, right like we are. I think an important thing is to make sure that people have a sound epistemological strategy and are operating, you know, well and appropriately in society and not, you know, harming anybody. But if it's important to you to have these conversations with them as they get older so that they can, you know, understand who you are better and open the dialogue, the way that I would open it is saying, you know, I know that we've lived our lives believing differently, and that may be difficult for you. I was hoping that maybe I could open up a dialogue about what we believe and why so that we could better understand each other. And I just want to assure you that the space I create for that conversation is going to be one where we still love and respect each other at the end of the dialogue and can speak openly. And that's the most important thing, because you matter to me more than what you believe. That's what I
Well,
would
this
do.
is why I called you guys. Those are both excellent advice, and actually, that framing it like that is much better than what I had in mind, actually. And so, that being said, with that framing for both of you, being really away from conversion or deconversion, then the books that I had picked out to send them may not be appropriate either. And one of the books, really the only book that I for sure wanted to send them, was Letter to a Christian Nation. And I don't know if that's a good idea at all. Should I bother even? I mean, it sounds to me from what you're saying that maybe I'd not send him any books at all initially, and just judge his interest before that.
Yeah, because the Letter to a Christian Nation may not be. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a lag.
Oh, just one last question was the corollary to that question was, that being said, what books would you recommend for this kid?
I have no idea what his interests are, would be, or what his belief looks like, or how it interacts with his relationships with people or the external world. So I don't know that I would be able to give a good overall recommendation. Like, I would have to know more about him and more about what he believes.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the book recommendation is a reflection of your concerns more than maybe what they necessarily need. You know, if you're concerned about them, you know, being entrenched in, you know, American evangelicalism or even like Christian nationalism, then there are a bunch of awesome books out there on that subject. Andrew Seidel's stuff comes to mind immediately. But again, like pointing back to what Shannon was saying, like centering any dialogue on the relationship and on skepticism, not on, I guess, like, you know, sort of hitting them over the head with like, hey, look, here's a book that explains why everything you believe is obviously wrong. You know what I mean? Like for a lot of people, they might pull back from that. You know what I mean?
A good book in general is David McRaney's How Minds Change. How Minds Change by David McRaney is just a good book for any sort of conversations about what we believe and why. Like, I would even recommend, like, based on the conversation we're having, it might be a great book for you to read as well. is David McRaney's How
Okay,
Minds
yeah.
Change. Super good book about, you know,
That's-
not only about practical skepticism and how to bring people to understandings.
Yeah.
That
I'm
sounds
really
like an
fond if we're
excellent
talking about
suggestion.
books. I'm more often than not, if I'm recommending books to people and I'm trying to promote skepticism, they're going to be books that are more about like decision making and you know, cognitive traps that we might fall into. So yeah, stuff that can you know, that helps them identify, you know, potential pitfalls that they might walk into, and for all of us, you know, like I'm a big fan. I really benefited from reading a book called Thinking Fast and Slow years ago.
I love
And
that book. Sorry.
it's excellent. And like the whole time I'm reading this book, I mean, I was already an atheist when I'm reading this book, but the whole time I'm reading it, I'm going, oh, I do that. Oh man, I do that too. Oh, I do this. And so it's beneficial to me. And then that way I know that it can be also helpful to other people who who also just want to believe true things and not believe false things.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very, very valuable input. I think you're exactly right that this should not be about religion. It should be more about, as you said, decision making and you know, the relationship and all that. I think that's exactly correct. And well, great. Well, thank you. And you've also given me some good books to read. And so thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you guys and keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Thanks.
jumped the gun. Jumped the gun. I always cut somebody off right when they're saying thank you. I'm the worst. I'm the worst. This is why Kenneth and I are arch nemesis, because I'm so awful. I have an announcement. If anybody would like to support us, here are some ways to support the Atheist Experience and the ACA. You can become a member for as little as 99 cents a month. You can just click the join button below the video, and this will give you access to special chat emojis so you can comment our faces on things. And the Atheist Experience is just one of the shows that is put on by the ACA. So make sure you check out our other shows as well. There's Secular Sexuality on Thursdays starting at 7 p.m. Central. Truth Wanted airs live on Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. And then we have our Sunday shows. Talk Heathen airs at 1 p.m. Central. Nonprofits is right before this show at 3 p.m. Central. And you can also support us on Patreon at tiny.cc/Patreon AXP. That was my announcment. Are you ready
There
to
you
take
go.
another call?
There you
I'm
go.
killing it.
Yeah,
Nails.
absolutely.
I nail it every time. All right.
It might have been the highlight of the show.
Let's
It's all
talk to
downhill
Troy.
from here.
I want to talk to Troy. Hello, Troy. You were on the
Hello.
Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
How are you guys doing? I just want to talk about my belief.
Cool.
Tell you guys about what I believe. I am an agnostic theist. Basically means that I don't believe in God, but I believe in a creator. So the reason I mean that, the reason I'm saying that is basically, I think that everything in existence, on an earthly level at least, that has been learned or acknowledged or, whatever you want to say, has been written by man. Everything.
Okay.
You can't tell me that the Bible was written by somebody because God told them to.
Okay.
I
So you
started
believe the
studying
entire
art.
body of knowledge that we have in the history of humanity is man-made?
Oh, yes. Of course.
Okay.
The domino
Cool. Gotcha. All right.
domino effect. I believe in evolution.
Cool.
I have some really far-fetched beliefs. I mean, I honestly believe that aliens probably came to our planet and probably planted us here or something, I just think that the odds of us being created are so slim. And it makes more sense. And you can't tell me that that doesn't make sense because there's people out there that actually believe in the Bible.
Troy, some of my very favorite calls that I've ever watched on this show are ones where Shannon talks to people about probability and statistics. So how did you figure out the probability of these things?
Yeah.
It's just, I look at the probability, and I think to myself, well, the probability is way beyond.
But like, how are you quantifying that though?
So,
Like, how are you quantifying these probabilities? Like, based on what?
I don't have to quantify them. I just think it's almost.
If you're going to
nearly
use
impossible for us
the
to
word probability,
if
though,
you're gonna
it
say
involves-
probably,
like, if you're like, it just sounds to
Okay,
me
it's
like you're
improbable.
saying that it kind of makes sense to you because reasons, but like you're not wrapping. Like, if you're going to use the word probability, you have to wrap some math around
what
that.
I'm saying
You know what
is
I mean?
if someone said but what I'm saying is if someone said that Jesus Christ died on the cross and then ascended to heaven and came back to life and all this other crap, then I can believe that Martians came down to Earth and put us in the water.
My head just went boom because it sounds to me like the justification you're using for holding your beliefs is, well, some people believe things that are more ridiculous, so why can't I believe this? Which doesn't sound like a good foundation for a belief system, really.
Well, what I would say is this: there's 150 billion planets in our galaxy alone.
Sure.
And over 100 billion observable galaxies in the entire, or 100 billion galaxies estimated in the observable universe. You can't tell me that there's not another civilization out there.
I mean, I don't.
But
sure.
that doesn't have anything to do with the stuff that you're saying. So like, we're sort of like, going all over the place here. Shannon was just addressing the question of, of course you can believe anything that you want. I think what we're sort of more interested in here is what should we believe if we care about whether the things we believe are true, and whether or not there are other civilizations, other life forms out in the universe. That doesn't have anything to do with whether or not any of it was created, does it?
But what I'm trying to tell you is intelligence. So we have intelligence. We have some.
I'd love it if you'd answer the question I just asked you. I'd love that personally.
What is the question you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking you if the existence of other life on other planets has anything to do with whether or not any life anywhere was created.
That's true. I think that some creator created something that caused some sort of domino effect, which eventually created some sort of life, which probably modeled us in their image.
You're just kicking a can down the road, though, right? You're saying it does. You're saying it makes sense that intelligent life was created, so that's a belief that you have. But I don't think that we were the first or only intelligent life created. So the only explanation for that must be that intelligent life was created elsewhere and then planted us here. Am I understanding your perspective correctly?
I would think on an earthly scale, how old the earth is. The odds of us evolving into who we are in that time frame is pretty slim. I think it has to be a lot older.
Billions of years, you don't think is like enough time?
No, I don't, honestly.
Well, and how are you figuring out what is and isn't likely here? Is it just your intuition? Like what method are you using?
It's my belief. It's just my belief.
Right, but why?
Yeah, exactly. Why? Why is the big important question hanging over all of our heads right now?
Well, the why. The why is just because you got a good point there. You got a good point. All I can say is that a bunch of nefarious people decided to get together and write a bunch of campfire stories, and then it all came into this book so that they could control the minds of the human population.
I mean, we get that you don't like or believe in the Bible for sure. Like, I get that, but sure, cool. But like, I don't think that what you believe is that far off from unsubstantiated either, though. Except for yours is just based on your own personal intuition, as opposed to being based on something somebody else wrote down. It's still like you still have to acknowledge that when we ask why, your answer to that is, yeah, good question. I'm not really quite sure. So I guess my question to you would be, aside from the fact that it wasn't written by somebody else, like, what's the difference between what you believe and what a Christian believes? Like, they both seem like unfounded, unsubstantiated belief systems that are based either one's based on intuition and the other one is based on, scripture. If anything, the Christian belief at least has something to point to.
Well, that's the problem. See, mine is a theory. I'm not giving any names or specific people or anything specific that happened. Mine's a theory. They actually believe specific people, specific things.
So you don't believe it. It's just a postulate. Like, you're saying maybe this is possible, but you don't believe it as true. You're just saying
no. I
this
think
is amongst the realm.
it's more probable.
But then we're back to probabilities, and you don't actually have any numbers to wrap around it.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Have
it. Bother you all. I get it. I
No.
get where it's coming from. At least we all don't. I just, it's hard for me to explain where I'm coming from with this, and I guess I really need to write it down to really come back and explain.
Sure. Revisit it with us again. So, because we
and
don't
you're
mean to
not
shut you
bothering
down,
anybody.
but those questions are valid, I think, right?
Yeah, it's just, you need to be asking yourself, like I'd say at every point, like if you write down, I think this is probable, just ask yourself why. What methodology am I using to determine that this is likely or even possible? And then, work it out. Think about it.
Yeah. Figure out more probable than what and why so that you can quantify it.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Cool.
That makes sense. I just don't think that it's possible that there's some kind of sky daddy out there that's directing us in any way possible. So,
I mean, I don't think
guys,
either of us are going to
okay.
argue with you on that.
Have a good one.
Have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Troy. Bye. This may come as a surprise to everybody, but I have an additional announcement. I have another announcement. If you shop on Amazon, then you can support the ACA at no cost to you. You simply visit tiny.cc/Amazon Smile ACA and designate the atheist community of Austin as your selected charity, and Amazon will donate a portion of their profit directly to the ACA. And we now have a channel that houses all of the shows that from the ACA in audio podcast form. Visit tiny.cc/AEN podcast. There you can listen to all the latest shows from the Atheist Experience, Talk Heathen, Truth Wanted, Secular Sexuality, the Nonprofits, and any others that appear on the channels. And we also have 3 Facebook groups that are run by the fans for the fans that you can interact with. The first is the Atheist Experience fan group that is at tiny.cc/FBAXP. There's also the Atheist Experience private fan group where you can interact with others without having those interactions appear on your public feed, and that is tiny.cc/FBAXPPR. And then there is a new group, the Atheist Experience fan group, Atheist versus Theist Debates. And that's where you can try out all of your best arguments on atheists and theists alike. And you can find that at tiny.cc/AXP fan debates. Check it out.
There you go.
I'm nailing these 100%. Every time. Are you ready for another call, my friend?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Let's take another one. All right, let's talk to Aaron. Hello, Aaron. You are on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I'd like to make a comment first on that last guy who calls. That call shows up on these shows so many times. Take anything that they talk about with probability, like arisal of life or intelligence or something. The chances of it happening are 100% because
it happened.
It happened. Yeah.
Chance of happening
So,
it based on the cause that's attributed to it, though, it's a different set of probabilities.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But I'm interested in what you have to say. What would you like to talk about, Aaron?
Okay. So, I'm an atheist, and I think I can call myself a scientist because I have been paid to do science. I don't know if that's fair, but
okay.
So I'm curious if the human brain is just kind of the way it's wired or the way that it's evolved and developed, if it just sort of craves the kind of thinking that comes with believing in a God, deity, or just weird things? Because in the modern era, when we have more people that are going away from the church, they'll still jump on things like QAnon or fairies or witchcraft or things like that.
I have possible answers to that. Kenneth, do you have, before I just go off on brain
No,
stuff? Do you have stuff
I'm deferring. I want to hear the brain stuff.
Okay, cool.
Why do we want cognitive closure, Shannon? What's wrong with us?
See, Kenneth, you got it. You're nailing it. So our brains are pattern seeking machines, right? So our brains function in a fashion that we perceive patterns in the environment and then attempt to incorporate them into the scaffolding of, how we operate and navigate and interact with those environments. Because there's not always technically a pattern, there's not always an actual terminus to the pattern that is
causation.
Kind of, correlation not being causation is a fair analogy, but it's a bit more complex than that. We always want to have an answer. We don't very often settle well with, well, I guess there just isn't an answer to that, or I just don't understand that. So the way that our brains are wired are to fill in those gaps, so that we can feel as though we have an acceptable answer to what we're perceiving. So we have a perception. That perception may be of something, a good example throughout history is like weather patterns. Like we see weather patterns, like prehistoric us. We don't really understand the weather patterns. We understand that they impact and affect us. We don't quite know why. And some sort of spiritual thinking about attempting to control the weather because we know it has an impact on us is a sort of natural thing to do because we're attempting to have some sort of degree of control over the environment that we don't understand. And we're filling in the gaps in our misunderstanding by just kind of asserting an understanding in order to feel more comfortable with the fact that we don't understand. So that sort of spiritual thinking is something that we all do innately. We can gravitate away from through better understanding, through building better mental models. We can gravitate away from the sort of like supernatural or spiritual or faulty thinking, because that's just what it is. It's faulty thinking. Sometimes it results in supernatural or spiritual thinking. Sometimes it results in false belief systems that have nothing to do with that. They're just like anti-vax, for example, is one of those false belief systems that's like a gap in information processing. Like we don't have access to the full information. We have a poor epistemology. We're having a fear response to something, and thus we like have these firmly entrenched beliefs that are based on not fully perceiving the whole picture of the environment around us, because we're not very good at thinking that we misunderstand things. We kind of clamp on to the fact that we feel as though our interpretation of the information is the accurate one and then respond accordingly. So we can gravitate away from that by
real quick.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Please do. I just yammered on for a very long time.
Is the idea that we're comfortable being, or we're able to tell ourselves that we are comfortable with saying, I don't know. Is that something that we had to develop culturally, and it's kind of against our development as a species neurologically? Or, I mean, I'm asking really complex questions about the brain, so I don't expect it to be like a hard and fast answer, but that's the thought I'm putting out there.
I think that we would have to learn to be comfortable with not knowing the answer to something and fully and truly accepting that. Because even if we know, like from a logical perspective, even if we say, well, I really don't know the answer to this question, we're more than likely going to fill that answer in with a belief of some sort, right? We can accept the fact, we can become comfortable with the fact that the belief that we're filling it in with may not be the best possible answer, and make sure that we're not holding hard and fast to it. But innately, we're going to fill that belief in with something. Like our brain doesn't allow us to just leave an empty space there, there's something that we see as the highest probability based on what we have available to us that we would likely form a belief around without, if we're cognitive of it, if we're making sure that we're being honest, that we don't allow it to form like a hard and fast solidified belief that we would act upon, but we're still filling it in with something, I think, if we're honest. Like I can't think of something like, even like, let's say the origin of the universe, right? That's something that I have no idea. And anybody who's reasonable will say that they have no idea what the origin of the universe is. Like they just don't know. They can't say that they know, but there's things that you will postulate or hear other people like propose. And more likely than not, one of those ideas that you hear will make the most sense to you, and that will fill in that gap. You'll update it if you're operating cognitively like at a highly functioning level. You'll update it as you go and as you have access to more information, but you will believe something in that hole. That's just the way that our brains work. Like some sort of belief will form. It's just a matter of how honest you are about whether or not you truly know that that is the ultimate answer, or if you recognize that some of those beliefs that you have are basically kind of like placeholders.
Okay, so that's
Aaron,
interesting. Do you mind me telling you just a little story of how I got here? I'll try to make it as quick as possible.
I think Kenneth was going to say something.
I just wanted to ask you one thing, Aaron, because you're in the United States. I was thinking about what Shannon was saying with sort of within the context of the, American, we'll just call it anti-intellectualism. I think that there is an element of socialization here where, like in the United States, for example, we very clearly have a culture where you are pressured to have opinions about things and come to conclusions about things, whether you know anything about them or not. I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and she was asking me about a news story, and she's a pretty hardcore conspiracy theorist. And she said, well, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, what do you think though? And I was like, I've done no research at all. I have no opinion here. And that blew her mind. We went in circles like 5 times for being like, no, but what do you think though? And she didn't understand what I was saying when I said, I don't have an opinion about this because I don't know anything about it. So, I mean, if you want to tug on that string with respect to the United States and why we are that way here, there's a number of excellent books on sort of the topic of American anti-intellectualism and, sort of why we love conspiracy theories here. I mean, even if we're looking at like the way that our country was founded, there's sort of the traces of conspiracy theory happening with, the people who drafted the Declaration of Independence going, hey, the king's really bad. And here's this, like 27, I think, things that the king's doing that are super bad. There's some embellishment in there. They're getting a little fuzzy with it, but people would read this and unite around it and rally and go, oh, okay, we have a sense of what's going on. This is useful. We can, form a rebellion around this set of ideas and feel like we really know what's going on across the ocean. To Shannon's point, and to your point too. I mean, we are uncomfortable. I think probably uniquely in the United States with this idea of not knowing what's going on. We all like to think of ourselves as being experts about everything. That's where that whole, lovely Dunning-Kruger thing happens all over the place. And it holds us back is where this rant is going. So I think that what you're noticing, it sounds like you're paying attention to, is a serious problem. And a lot of social problems that we have, a lot of the religious ideologies that you'll see out there are symptoms of this more foundational problem of people just don't like admitting that they don't know some stuff.
Yeah. Or conflating beliefs with truth.
Yeah.
Like the conflation of what you believe with what is true.
Isaac Asimov said something like that, that in the United States, there's this sort of unique anti-intellectualism where my belief is as good as anyone else's knowledge. I may have mangled that quote a little bit, but yeah, sucks.
Yeah, because like to what I said about like there's something that you would believe about something. There's a difference between saying, okay, to me personally, this is the best explanation that I can think of. But if somebody asked me, I would say what Kenneth said. I would say, I don't know, because honestly to myself, I don't know. I know that there's like some sort of loosely fitting best possible explanation I've been exposed to that I've somewhat accepted. But if like learning to settle into comfort with, yeah, but that doesn't mean that just because that's what my brain did, that doesn't mean that I know shit. Just,
Well, and what's
there's a
better?
difference between the two.
I mean, what's better, just admitting you don't know, or manufacturing something so your brain can secrete some feel happy chemicals and you can,
That's that's the
well,
clinical term for them.
So
Right.
as a kid, I
You look up
definitely
dopamine.
I was a very smart kid, and I was told I
Mhm.
was smart, which is the worst thing you can do to a smart kid. So I knew everything. And if I didn't have
Uh-oh.
an answer, you got one anyway. You know,
Mm.
when I got older and I learned how to say I don't know, that was kind of a pivotal thing. But it's very interesting what Shannon was saying, and eye-opening, that I am still, even when I don't have answers to these weird things that we don't even need to go into, I still try to come up with some kind of placeholder that's just less insane than I'm manufacturing a tulpa. You know, instead it's
Yeah.
something going on in my head. But
That's part of learning
but then
process
so,
too, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
so then let's go to the next part of that, because we're talking about how you know, especially in American society, that pressure to have an answer is what's pushing a lot of things that are going on here. If it is inherent in our brains, just the way that they kind of function, how do you approach remedying the kind of, I mean, I guess that's what the whole Atheist Experience is about. So I'm not expecting a clear answer.
Better education
but
on
like,
individual psychology. Like if more people understood,
that-
that's one of the reasons that I started doing this. One of the list of reasons, but one of the reasons I started doing this was because I saw a lot of people talking about like how religion doesn't comport with like biology or philosophy, but I didn't see anybody talking about the psychology of it. But at least on a broader scale, I didn't see it, you
Seems like
know,
the first
as
step.
well and that's exactly right. Like it seems to me like that should be the first step. If we want to do better as a society, first thing that we should focus on is understanding ourselves, understanding how we process things, understanding how we learn things, understanding how we perceive things, understanding how we come to know things. All of those are within the realm of psychology. And if people had a better understanding of how they assimilate and incorporate perceptual information into what they perceive as knowledge and the impact that has on how they interact with the world, if they had a better understanding about the processes involved with that, they would be more and better equipped to understand where their beliefs are ultimately coming from and whether or not they're well-founded and substantiated. So I think better education on individual and group psychology, cognition in general, not necessarily even just neuroscience, but like foundational psychology and perceptual cognition and learning would be huge.
That's
would
so
be a
interesting.
huge step.
So, okay, because I tend to just
have to
like
convince them
be,
it's not the work of the devil.
well, that helps
that's
too.
fair. Right.
Shannon, with respect to what you were just saying,
Yeah.
so I tend to be just like very focused on like the critical thinking aspect of it, and don't pay attention hardly at all to talking to people about their motives. So now you're getting doubled. You got a caller asking you questions and a co-host asking you questions. How do you think about that intersection of the psychology and the philosophy? Like where on the Venn diagram is the sweet spot for us to be you know, communicating effectively with people who might have, you know, biases that they're unaware of, like we all
Everybody has biases they're unaware of.
Right.
So like, you're just like basically asking me how to communicate with humans, right? 'Cause
Well, yeah,
everybody has biases that they're unaware of.
I mean, do you think of them as separate things though? Like the critical thinking side and the sort of, you know,
How you think
psychology
is part
side?
of your psychology. Like critical thinking is part of psychology. So how people form those thoughts, like the thought process that somebody has, is part of their psychology.
I don't
So
ever hear
if
people
you're
talking about it like this.
Well, but it's true though when you think about it.
Yeah.
So if somebody has a poor epistemological frameworks, people tend to approach that more so like in this realm from like a philosophical perspective, right? They,
Mhm.
they tend to batter people with, well, you don't understand why you're using a poor
Honestly, I just
philosophical
Right.
cannot
framework.
stand that
That's
approach.
that's
Yeah,
right.
me,
That's what I do.
but
Yes.
if
Right.
yes, but if you're speaking to somebody who, let's say, is entirely disinterested in philosophy, and you're interested in changing their mind, approaching it like that is going to be entirely and totally ineffective. You're just going to be having a conversation with them about something they don't care about and aren't interested in. And the only thing that you're going to be able to accomplish is making them feel like you think that you're smarter than them or know more about a subject that they didn't care about to begin with.
Right.
So trying to figure out how they get to what they believe and whether or not that's a good way to get to that, you can demonstrate to them by trying better to understand why they believe what they believe. How they got there is the most important. If you actually give a shit about whether or not they change their mind and believe appropriate things, if you're more interested in demonstrating that they're believing silly things to either them or other people, then, you know, throwing, you know, like philosophy and throwing, you know, like that, these are your, whatever you call them, the fallacies. Like, here's your list of fallacies, dummy. Like that. Most people are just going to walk away from that conversation frustrated, not caring, and not wanting to interact with you again if that's the type of approach that you have.
Right.
Some other people may be maybe watching and cheering you on because they agree with you that those fallacies are in fact an accurate representation of the fallacies that that person was representing. But why do they not see those as fallacies? Why do they not care that they're fallacies? How are they able to work their way around perceiving them as fallacies? Those are all elements of their individual psychology. And our individual psychology is what gets us to what we believe, not which philosophy book we read most recently.
I love it. See, I'm playing the devil's advocate thing over here because I do see people on every social media platform, everywhere I go, just bashing people over the head and using like the names of fallacies. I love when people do that. Oh, well, what you just did was a fallacy. And like the other person, they don't hear exactly like what you said. They don't. It's just, oh, this person, you know, is being an asshole is basically all that's going on in their head. So anyway, I was wanted us to flesh that out a little bit more.
I could talk about that all day.
Who's that guy with the fallacy card game?
That's Steve. That's Steven.
I mean, it's useful to be able to identify fallacies, but if like normally when you tell somebody that's a fallacy, what they hear is you're telling them that they're wrong, which isn't even what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're telling somebody that their argument is fallacious, you're saying that we can't know. Of course, what we're telling them is we can't know that their conclusion is true. It's not supported by however they're getting there. But if all you do is go, oh, well, that's a fallacy, then you've done nothing to help that person. You might be, again, making your own brain secrete happy feelings because you were able to identify a fallacy. You're out there like a Pokemon hunter just trying to catch them all, and that's good for you. But if the goal is to communicate effectively with people and to change minds, then I think what Shannon's talking about here is very, very important.
I agree. And I think that people should know what fallacies are too, because if you want to believe true things, that should be important to you. Right. So I'm not saying that there's no place for philosophy. There's no place for these other sciences. I'm saying that psychology needs to be brought more into the dialogues depending on what your motive is. Like if your motive is just to like point out fallacies and like mic drop and like celebrate that you're right and somebody else is wrong and you could demonstrate it, then neat. But if you care about more people being able to get to appropriate conclusions the right way, you need to not just talk about fallacies. You need to try to figure out why people are engaging them and don't see a problem. That needs to be a part of the conversation.
So just one last thing, and I'll let you go so I don't take up all your time. Because I've just started watching all of these call-in shows in the last 6 months or so. And so like everybody has, I've heard a lot of opinions on this. I'm just curious about yours. How do you tell or when do you decide that a person is just, no matter what you do, is not going to be receptive to changing their mind and it's just time to just end the conversation, I guess?
In an individual conversation, if I sense that they're
Yeah,
attempting
just like
to,
in an individual conversation. Like, is there kind of like, something they'll say, or something they'll just keep doing, where if they gish gallop or if they go around in circles.
I don't, those don't
Like,
frustrate
is
me
there
as much.
something that you kind of recognize?
Abuse tactics for me, like abuse and manipulation
Mm.
tactics and dialogues are the line for me. That's when I'm not engaging with you anymore, because I recognize that the point of this conversation for you is to assert some form of dominance or
They don't.
control
Okay.
over the conversation, as
Like, they're
opposed
not having a
to like engaging
conversation.
in
They're
honest.
just yelling at you.
No, it's not even yelling. Like sometimes people will yell out of just sheer
Okay.
frustration, right? Like exposing things about like faulty things about your belief systems can be incredibly frustrating and anger inducing. So somebody getting frustrated or angry isn't something that I have like any sort of like emotional react. Like that's not something that would shut down a conversation. Like if something escalates to the point that I don't
Okay.
think that we're going to be able to have a healthy dialogue in this moment, I would say, okay, like maybe this is getting emotionally like escalated. Like let's take a beat and we can revisit this tomorrow or the next day or whenever we see each other again, right? Like that. But I don't think that I would just disengage entirely with that person. The only reason I would
Okay.
disengage entirely with a person that I was engaged in this sort of dialogue with is if I sense them continuously attempting to like emotionally or mentally manipulate or using abuse strategies, because I do not have time for that, because you're not even engaging in this conversation because you want to talk about what you believe. You're engaging in this conversation because you want to assert dominance and control over me, and I am not your fucking daisy when it comes to that, bud.
So is it okay once you've identified those people to take the Jimmy Snow tack and just start messing with them?
I wouldn't personally. I would just
What's your
I
goal?
would just
Oh, okay.
avoid them. I would just avoid them. I would just no longer engage with them. I wouldn't give them any of my mental space, period, full stop. Like they just no longer get to exist in the effortful, energized portion of my world where I spend any time attempting to engage or give my energy to people. They don't get that anymore because they don't deserve it from
Okay.
me.
I'll tell you, Aaron, there's also, I
That'd be
mean,
better for my
in
mental
addition to, they would, yeah, probably. In addition to what Shannon said, I mean, being able to identify people who are just, abusers masquerading as people who want to have conversations, I mean, that's huge. But there also are people who, I mean this exactly how it sounds, do not know how to have a conversation, where like the idea of two people exchanging ideas, listening actively, responding to each other's points is completely foreign to them. They actually don't have the skills to do it. So there sometimes you'll be talking to somebody and they'll make a point and you'll make a point, and one of you will say something about the other, and when that person realizes that something that they've said was wrong, they'll just move on to the next thing or just keep restating it. And like some people don't know how to have a conversation. So sometimes I think you actually have to say, hey, I'm interested in an exchange of ideas. It doesn't sound like you know how to do that right now, but good news, it's easy to learn how. Maybe you go work on that and circle back, and we can try actually having a conversation sometime in the future. Because otherwise it can just be extremely frustrating, and it's not going to be productive at that point. It may be productive in the context of a show like this. It may be productive because there is an audience that those people may be listening actively. So as you're,
Right.
deconstructing somebody's arguments,
Sure.
it can be beneficial to the audience, even if it isn't necessarily beneficial in that moment to the caller. But that's different. If it's just like a one-on-one thing and you're talking to people, you might, don't engage with abusers, and recognize that some people literally can't have a talk with you.
Yeah, I did question why, because there's some callers that show up on every show and they do the same thing every time. I could not wrap my mind around why they kept accepting those calls, but that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, we will let you go.
All right,
Thank you
cool.
very much for the
I'll let you
conversation.
go.
Have a good day, Aaron.
Good
Bye.
talking to you. You too.
You too. All right. Lovely call. It was an interesting conversation.
There you go.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation and you would like to see what other conversations took place on all of the ACA shows this past week, we got it for you right now. Let's go. Woo!
And so, are there any circumstances where polyandry, where multiple husbands might be allowed or mentioned in Islam?
0. You will be stoned to death if you dare.
Man, the Book of Revelations is metalist. I'd like to see a beast with 7 heads, upon its head 7 crowns, and its mouth the word blasphemy. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I want to meet this, like, the whore of Babylon. She seems cool.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of pushing your religious bigotry on students that are young and impressionable, how about you focus on educating them and getting them to graduate high school and actually give them resources for college and careers like you said you would? How about that?
There's no way to get around this now. You've all been already discussing this, but I have to come out to all of you and say that I am actually trans Jesus. Like I am the second coming of trans Jesus.
25,000 people, including over 10,000 children, starve to death every single day. That's more than 1,000 people an hour. In the time it's taken us to do this show, over 1,000 people have starved to death. If there's a God, what's up with that?
All right, squad. If you can arrange to be in the Austin area between October 27th and October 30th, consider joining us in our studio audience at the ACA Free Thought Library for a live broadcast of Secular Sexuality and Truth Wanted Halloween special and Talk Heathen and the Atheist Experience. Doors will open at 6 p.m. on Thursday and Friday and noon on Sunday. Parking is wherever you can find a legal spot after the lot is full. And if you can't make it there this month, we will continue to broadcast live from the library the last week of every month. So keep watching this show and our website, atheist-community.org, for news and information as we expand our in-studio offerings in the near future. All right. You ready for another one?
Always.
Can you handle it? I knew you could handle it.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
take another one. It's Dmitry o'clock. Let's go.
Awesome.
We're going to talk to Dmitry. Hello, Dmitry. You were on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Hey, how's it going? Well, my main topic today is based on a book I read by Max Tegmark called Our Mathematical Universe. Have you heard of it?
I've not.
Nope.
Hello? No?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Did you get my introduction or no about the Max Tegmark?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah. Neither of us had heard of the book.
Yeah, you're cutting
okay.
up though a little
So
bit. I'm not sure. Like you're cutting in and
Is
out.
it really
on me.
bad?
Yeah. It's. a
It
little
sounds
bad.
like you're in a
You're wobbly.
helicopter at the
Yeah.
bottom of a well.
We're just like talking into a fan. Ever do that?
Yeah.
I used to do that when I was a kid.
All right. How's that? Is that good?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Are
But
we-
yeah, no, neither of us have read Our Mathematical Universe.
Great. So I'm an atheist, and after reading this book, I have sort of a feeling of existential security. You know, becoming an atheist, I'm like 11 years old, growing up in church, a Pentecostal church, and my whole family is religious and stuff like that. And even as like an 11-year-old, I know that it's not true. You know, like magic. It's basically Santa Claus to me, about going to heaven and all these things. But for a long time, I was suffering from like depression because if there is no God, there's like no purpose in life, you know, and I was kind of depressed about that. But after reading this book, I got a certain kind of feeling of existential security, you know, like I understand where the universe comes from, my purpose in life, and it's Christians are being Christian because it gives them sort of a meaning. I think the ideas in this book would sort of help people if they wanted to become atheists, you know, and not suffer from an existential kind of dread.
Okay. I think that I'm interested in the book. I understand what you mean. I think I am as many, Kenneth may agree with me here, that I am past that, but had issues during deconversion, because meaning was presented to me as being something that must be given to me by God and not something that could have intrinsic value to me as an individual, just through having experiences in life and feeling what those experiences are like, and that having value to me. It took me a little while to get to that point, so I can understand and share that frustration. I'm glad to hear that this book, whatever it may be, I've not experienced it, helped you get to that point, and I hope more people can as well.
Are you interested in hearing about it, or should I just, you know?
No, not on air,
idea.
probably. Not on air about a book
Okay.
in particular, because we can't promote any individual book that we've not already familiarized ourselves with.
Well, it's basically, it's not even just that book. It's like a whole way of thinking that's basically like Platonism or the ideal realm, or basically in a nutshell, it's the idea that mathematics is the only thing that really exists, you know? And that's like a secular kind of viewpoint, right? There's no God there. But it is sort of magical at the same time, you know? It's a little bit kooky.
Yeah,
do you agree?
I don't know enough about it to either to our conversations earlier. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, we've come full circle. Dmitry,
Yeah.
the thing I got to ask you, so when I was looking at the call screening log, this isn't at all what we thought we were going to be talking to you about. In the call screening thing, it said that you wanted to talk about Christianity being descended from paganism. Was there multiple things you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, that's sort of related. You know, this kind of idea that there's a world of mathematics or of ideal forms was created by like Plato and all these ancient philosophers and stuff like that. And while reading the Bible, I actually read the whole thing from like beginning to end. I read it through like a scientific viewpoint, and like, of course, I'm like making stuff up using my own intuition. But like the way I sort of read Moses, for instance, you know, Exodus, it's sort of like the cult of Christianity sort of started in Egypt, you know, when, at least that's from their tradition, you know, that they were enslaved and there was all sorts of mysticism there. And my theory is, it's kind of a crazy theory, that this sort of idea that there's a world of mathematics could have been sort of corrupted into this whole spiritual thing, that there's God, that there's magic, that there's soul. It could be like a misunderstanding of this deeper truth that mathematics is behind everything. You know what I mean?
This is interesting. You're taking me back to, I'll out myself. I was an English major as an undergrad. So I used to sit, I know. I used to sit in classrooms and people would read books. And then, you know, in the realm of sort of like, you know, literary analysis and textual criticism, people could make these sort of post hoc rationalizations with the stuff that they read and go, oh, okay, I know that the story was about Jack and Jill going up a hill, but what if what it's really about is how everything is math? And then we would talk about it. I'm wondering if that's what you're doing with the Bible. Okay. Right.
Definitely.
Cool.
It is a bit kooky, and it's not, you know, I'm a really intuitive person, like you were talking before. Like, the way I can explain it is like the game of chess. You know, you have to think through every single move, and then you win by calculating everything out. I hate that, thinking through every move. I'm more of like a intuitive person. I'll just go wherever my intuition takes me, and if I lose, I lose. You know what I mean? I'll learn through mistakes than logic. So I understand
we
that
couldn't
it's
be
a little
more opposite.
Yeah.
I future
mean-
project every possible scenario I can conceive of in order to try to deliberate on the decision that I'm about to make. I'm not sure that that's healthy.
yeah.
That's
I think
causes
my
anxiety. that's for sure.
intuitions are useful until they're not, which happens often.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
I agree. Here's my justification for using intuition is that every time you're wrong using intuition, your intuition is updated and it becomes better. You know what I mean? not to be afraid of the failure.
Well, no, I would say that every time that your intuition is inaccurate, you learned what the accurate way to deal with that specific scenario is. So you no longer have to utilize your intuition in that scenario. And then the next time you use your intuition in a different scenario, you're up against the same sort of thing.
I mean,
I wonder
there have been times I've used my intuition that I was right, and there have been times that I was wrong. So
that's a
it's
false
you know what
positive.
totally at the end of the
But
day.
you know what that tells us? That tells us that intuition isn't very useful. if intuition can be used to be both right and wrong, then maybe there's some better epistemological tool that, like, I don't know, like maybe reason or something, that could be used to try to, more reliably come to correct conclusions.
I mean,
Almost
don't you
like it's
think
no better
that
than
it's
chance.
not really mutually exclusive at the same time? That the logic could also be sort of intuitive,
If you're incorporating logic into your intuitions, then you're approaching the realm of, rationalization as opposed to just like pure emotional intuition. Which I mean, good, yay.
Yeah.
But yes, we do have to
I'm
let
not
you go
perfect.
though.
I definitely make
I
mistakes.
enjoyed the conversation about like we're well off and we're into intuition land now. Which,
We're not perfect either, Dmitry. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, Kenneth's not, but
right.
Clearly, I am.
Correct.
We'll never make great decisions.
Have
Thank
a
you
good
for
one,
having
Dmitry.
have the best day, Dmitry. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for calling.
Bye.
See you later. Bye. I have one additional announcement that I would like to make. We have a brand new store. You can visit tiny.cc/merchandise /merch ACA. My gosh, why did they let me do these things? I tried to pawn it off on Kenneth, but he wouldn't take it. So now everybody's stuck with me. Thank Kenneth. To get your favorite items like t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs. And you can check our brand new items like beanies, cell phone cases, and tote bags. We even now have a feature special limited edition item each month. So be sure to check out our store and all the stores for all of our other shows. And right below the chat, you'll notice that there is a donate now box in the live chat. Donations made there mean that the ACA will get 100% of the proceeds. YouTube does not take a cut, and that is the best way to support us. And finally, most important announcement I have ever and will ever make. The crew! Woo!
Yay.
Thank you to the crew who have to deal with
The
all
best
of our
crew.
nonsense all
Yeah.
the time. And we are nightmares. So they deserve everything, all of the accolades, all of the time. The crew is the best. They work diligently. They work like tirelessly.
Yeah.
And they had to deal with me and Kenneth before the show.
If there
which
was
I
no crew,
can't have
it
been
would just-
can't have been easy.
Yeah, with no crew, it would just
you
be
imagine?
Shannon and I in our respective rooms talking to ourselves, which, that'd be weird.
I know exactly. I would just be sitting here talking to my computer by myself, as I
Same.
want to do when I'm not
Right.
hosting this show.
When the
That's all
crew's
I
not
do.
around,
When
right?
the camera's off, I'm just talking to imaginary people through my headphones, staring at my computer screen, pretending Kenneth's here to keep me company. So good job, crew. Thank
There
you
we
for
go.
all the hard work that you're doing. All right, we still have a few more calls that I think we can fit in. Let's talk to Dan. It's Dan. Hello,
Dan.
Dan. You were on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Hello.
Hey.
Hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, you have a question. Does the soul exist?
Mhm.
Instead, I want to answer the question, what is a soul?
I don't think it exists. So you're asking me to operationalize something that I don't think is possible, which is I can't do that. Like you would have to tell me what you think a soul is and then demonstrate to me whether or not it's real. Because I don't think it exists. I could tell you what some other people maybe have believed in the past or what I previously believed. But I would think all of those would be really fallible definitions. Obviously, if they weren't, then I would have held to one.
Yeah.
Do you think it exists?
Definitely.
Okay. What is it?
Well, the soul, let me give you the description of it. The soul has a similar meaning like the word suspect. The soul is referring to the mind. The mind is what we use to make decisions to do what we do every day. This mind is subjected to be evaluated and judged, and then put in a place where it may not be our choosing. That is what a soul is. Another way to describe it is the mind which is having a fate. That is what a soul is.
Which has a fate. So
Right.
the first thing I heard you say is that the soul is the mind. So you think that they're synonyms? You think they're the same thing? You think that the soul and the mind are synonymous with each other? They are the same thing? Is that a fair statement? Hello? Oh, we've lost him. Darn!
Can you tease?
Oh, man. I always say every time I'm hosting, no one wants to call and talk about the soul. And then finally someone called to talk about the soul. And the moment I had the first question, he
Call back, Dan.
Oh, guys. Why won't anybody call and talk to me about the soul? That's
Look
fine.
at what
Whatever.
you've done. Shannon's
Yeah,
devastated.
I'm upset. I'm upset. Right? Ugh, okay. It's fine. I
Well,
can carry on.
Maybe Dan will call back.
I hope
We got a
so.
little bit of
All right.
time.
Call back, Dan. We still have some time. All right. Next, we will talk to Michael. Hello, Michael. You are on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Super.
Doing
What would you
great.
talk about today?
Awesome. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I've actually never called in before. But I was having a conversation with a theist. I'm an atheist, but I still actively, seek out hearing from all kinds of people because this sort of thing interests me. And so I was trying to have a discussion with one particular theist, and he brought up some method for verifying historical evidence. And when I looked up, I actually never heard of it, despite I did a lot of apologetics back when I was a theist. It's called the bibliographic test, but basically I look it up and it's coming from all these Christian sources and it doesn't seem very reliable. But I guess my question is, when I'm having a discussion with somebody, theist, atheist, whoever, and they bring up some sort of set of criteria, how do I go about evaluating whether or not, okay, I'll grant you that, or, saying, hey, hold on, like, why is this what you're evaluating, whatever your claim is, by, and sort of, does that make any sense?
Like, what are you talking about? Granting a premise or granting their methodology for accepting that premise?
A methodology. Sometimes it's very like, oh, that's circular, but just generally speaking, if you're having a discussion with somebody, how do you, they clearly have their methodology, which obviously will end up resulting in whatever they're claiming, and just sort of, how does one go about evaluating the methodology that somebody puts forth as for how they reached the conclusion that they did?
I would walk them through. Kenneth probably has totally different answer than me, but so I'll say I'm gonna assert my dominance and say mine first. So what I would do is I would walk them through why I would reject the premise that we're talking about. So I don't even need to accept their methodology, right? If I'm rejecting the premise, there's a reason, right? Because it didn't comport to the standards of my methodology. So accepting their methodology doesn't seem like it would make sense to me, because it's clearly not a methodology that I would use. Because if that methodology leads you to that conclusion and I didn't end up with that conclusion, I must have some sort of problem with that methodology. But you can get caught in the weeds if you're just talking about the methodologies, and when what's important is the conclusion. So I would walk them through why I have problems with the conclusion, like just demonstrate to them in the dialogue what methodology I would be using to reject the conclusion that they're putting forth as an accurate one. Would be what I
Right.
would
Well, I
do
guess
in that scenario.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was done. I'm done. Do you have any thoughts, Kenneth? Would you do something different?
Well, when we're talking about evidence and the nature of evidence, I use sort of a dumbed down like definition for people when I'm having conversations. When they say, "Oh, I've got evidence of X," I go, "Great." When I use the word evidence, I mean anything that can be used to demonstrate the truth of a claim. Do we mean the same thing? And then we can talk about it. So now, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about with this bibliographical test thing, we're talking about whether the biblical texts that we have now match the sort of earlier manuscripts. But that doesn't have anything to do with whether what's in like the actual claims is true. So I'd be like, objection, relevance. So yeah, like in
litmus, yeah.
Right. So would that be like, okay, I just want to make sure I understand what you just said, Kenneth, because that's bananas to me, because that would just be like saying, okay, so I have this new copy of Harry Potter that I got from the store, and let's analyze how closely it matches the author's draft that was sent to the publisher. And that, therefore, everything that happened in this book is true.
That is basically what it is. Yes.
Oh yeah, so I'd be able to poke holes.
So I guess it's sort of misdirection of like, well, hold on, granting this premise. Okay, yeah. So it was,
and this is why figuring out what we're talking about when we talk about evidence is important, because a lot of people, when they use the word evidence, they're just talking about whatever reason they have. But the reason that they have might not actually be useful for demonstrating the truth of their conclusion. It might just be a reason. Faith is a reason, but is faith evidence? Nope.
Right.
Because it can't be used to demonstrate the truth of whatever the claim is.
Yeah. Like, and in that instance, now that I understand it, you could just point out that even if the methodology that they're using to analyze the similarity between original transcripts and the current Bible is sound, it has nothing to do with their fucking conclusion.
Let's assume it's super. Let's assume that all matches. Okay, how do we know Jesus rose from the dead? How do we know Jesus turned water into wine? How do we know he said this, and that? Right. They would have all of their work in front of you if you just granted, for the sake of conversation, that we have super duper mega reliable manuscripts.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's kind of where I fell for it at that point in the conversation had been going on for a while. And what he fell on was like, well, all these people wouldn't have died for that. Like, how many people died in Waco? Like people die for things that they don't believe in or that they think are true that might not be true all the time. And so I guess, sort of that talking about that test was sort of meant to bolster his credibility and make him sound kind of more. And I don't think he meant it maliciously, but I guess sort of looking out for, hold on, like what is this method that you're using? What does it apply to? And is this even relevant to our conversation? Like you're saying, like just because the first edition of Harry Potter might be the same as the seventh, that doesn't mean that wizards exist. So, sort of
and also if they start talking about
what is this looking at?
And if they start talking about martyrs, you can use their own methodology against them, because whatever textual and historical methodology they're using for the critical analysis of like how the book was comprised, they would have to admit that there's really not a significant amount of evidence that anybody died specifically, like that was in the position to know Jesus was alive and was Savior. There's not a lot of historical evidence that many of them actually died for that belief.
Right. And even Christian scholars, will tell you that. But if you're being mindful of this, you'll notice it all the time. I was in a conversation with a theist yesterday over on TikTok. And the guy was making the case. He said, well, there are locations in the Bible that we know are real places. Ergo, we can know that all the other shit in the Bible is definitely 100% true. And I pointed out that New York is a real place. Queens and Brooklyn are real places.
Right. Therefore, Spider-Man.
That doesn't mean that Captain America and Spider-Man are real. There was a run of Spider-Man featuring Barack Obama years ago, having adventures with Spider-Man. So we've got an authentic historical figure in there. But this cannot be used to demonstrate the truth of a claim like Barack Obama had adventures with Spider-Man. So that's we have to evaluate whether what's being presented is in fact actual evidence. And to me, it all hinges on that question of what's called probative value in the legal world, which is, can this be used to demonstrate the truth of the issue that's in question? And if not, then it ain't evidence.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so it is more of a relevance issue than an issue of that particular claim.
Word.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. You know, it doesn't make sense examining someone's methodology if you're kind of already out of the ballpark of what the original question was in the first place.
Yeah, sounds like they tap danced away from defending their claim into defending an
Oh boy, did
entirely
he ever.
different
Oh
claim
boy,
and
did he
hoping
ever.
that because
Yeah.
it was tangentially related that you would say, oh, okay, I guess there
I'd
is
be impressed
evidence,
with
even
this.
though that's not
This
evidence
is
for
what
anything that
scholars
you were
do, or this
talking
is
about initially.
historical. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they impressed
Yeah,
that the
totally.
chain of custody for the Book of Mormon is super duper tight? That there are super early manuscripts for the Book of Mormon that match what we have now? And if not, why are they playing by a different set of rules for the obviously 100% true revelation to Joseph Smith, as opposed to, you know, like the
Right. That's only
Love
a few
me an
hundred years
outsider
versus
test of
1,000.
faith.
Obviously, that's true. Yeah.
exactly that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. That makes a lot of sense.
No problem. Thanks for calling and enjoy the rest of your day, Michael.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, y'all.
See you later. Bye. Okay. Ben, let's talk to Ben.
Let's do it.
Hi, Ben. You're on the Atheist Experience. What would you like to talk about today?
Hi, come back.
You're
the same
back.
guy.
It's the same Ben.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I'm back.
Yay. Welcome back. I can hear you significantly better now too, which is
Wait,
great.
is it Dan? Is it Ben? Who the hell are we talking to?
Yeah.
Yes, speaking.
All right, whatever.
BenDan.
I think I'm losing.
Banded.
I think I'm losing too.
All right. Well, we're here, Ben. So tell us about the soul.
I think I already described the soul to you.
So you described the soul. The question I asked you as you dropped off was you said the soul is the mind. So do you see the soul and the mind as the exact same thing? Don't do this to me again, Ben. Do you see them as the exact same thing? I can still see that you're here this time,
well, the soul and the mind, the soul is coming from the point of view of the mind. But the soul has a situation where it can be judged or evaluated or put in place where you don't like it or you like it.
Okay, so I'm not fully understanding what you're saying. Are you saying that the soul isn't the mind, but the soul can judge what the mind
No,
does?
the soul is the mind. The soul is coming from the point of view of the mind. It talked about the mind because the mind used to make decision every day. This mind is subject to be, the decision we make is subject to be evaluated and judged.
It sounds to, I think, Shannon, okay, BenDan, let me know if I'm getting this right. Because I think that what you're describing is that there is some part of our mind that survives our death and then goes on to be judged. Is that what you're saying?
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Kenneth. Okay, so you're saying that the soul is the soul is the portion of our mind that continues to exist after we're dead, and then we'll be judged. Okay. So while we're alive is what I'm interested in, and the practicality and functionality, like how the soul works. So do you think the soul is inside your body? Like right now?
Well, let me put it this way. When science talked about consciousness, it talked about the awareness of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The soul is about the mind. The spirit is about the whole personality.
Okay. So that doesn't quite answer my question though. So are you saying that you think the soul is in the body? Like, do you think the soul is in the brain?
Is it physical?
Yeah.
Well, you can say the mind it's not a physical. The spirit is the physical. The mind is the functioning, the consciousness, the functioning of the individual.
So, go ahead, Kenneth.
I have a question. Dan, there's this story a long time ago where there's this guy, I know Shannon knows who this is, this guy named Phineas Gage. And he was in an accident where a metal spike got driven through his head. And it changed, like, fundamentally who he was. So the way that he made decisions changed. His personality changed. His ability to regulate his impulses changed. So I'm wondering, would you think of this as being his soul being damaged? Did his soul change? Because who he was changed.
Okay, let me put it this way. We exist in two forms, the physical and the spiritual. Okay, so it's like a car and a driver. When the car is damaged, the driver can't do anything about that. When the driver is out, the car can't do anything about that too. So
Okay,
you have
so
the driver and the car.
that's some JP Morgan stuff.
Yeah.
So I've heard that before. So the analogy falls apart though when you're putting it next to salvation, right? So in Phineas Gage's instance, what Kenneth brought up, he actually had he was a railroad worker, and a dampening rod exploded and went through his frontal orbital bone, through his prefrontal cortex, then out the top of his head. So now, like Kenneth referenced, because he had part of his orbital prefrontal cortex just obliterated, that part of your brain regulates things like impulse control and decision making. So he was a very good Christian boy beforehand, and afterwards was a gambler and a smoker and a philanderer. So by all metrics that you
Sounds
would
like a mega church pastor.
Stop distracting. By all metrics that of salvation that are available to Christians that they're aware of, he's failing now. He was succeeding before and is failing now through no fault of his own. So you have to reconcile yourself with the fact that because of a physiological change to the constitution of his brain, he has now lost salvation. So in this instance, the driver of the car goes down with the car. If the car is broken because somebody else smashes into the front of the car, even though it's not the driver's fault and the driver's still conscious, the driver goes down with the ship in that instance. The driver cannot get out of the car. Your soul doesn't get salvation anymore because of something that happened to the car. So, I mean, that analogy sounds neat, but it also doesn't work in this instance when you hold it under scrutiny. So why, because of a physiological change, does he no longer have salvation? That was out of his control. Why? Because his car is broken. Why is he no longer qualified for salvation?
Well, if the car is damaged, then he is not responsible for the damage. God doesn't judge because of the damage.
So people who have any sort, so to what scale then? Because if you're talking about, we're talking about large scale damage when it comes to Phineas Gage, right? So now let's talk about somebody who has.
Why would he be responsible for the damage either? Like it was an accident. Why would he be?
It was an accident. Well, he's saying that God will give him salvation because he was not responsible for the damage.
Oh, okay. I misheard them.
Yeah,
okay.
That's what he's saying. He's saying God will say, okay, that's cool. You weren't responsible for the damage. You get salvation. So my question
is there like an insurance claim that gets filed? Like,
like how do you know? That's where the scale thing comes in, because you can have physiological changes to your brain due to addiction, right? So I could be addicted to a substance, and that substance can now cause a physiological change in my brain. And that addiction causes a form of brain damage that could affect the same areas of my brain. Now, that's a result of my brain's function interacting with my behavior. And that brain damage could cause me to have poor impulse control in the same way. Now, in that instance, I now have poor impulse control as a result of brain damage. Same scenario. Do I get to keep my salvation in that instance? I'm a drug addict. Poor impulse control due to brain damage as a result of drug use. Do I get to keep my salvation?
I won't have the answer, but for what I learned from a psychic, she said in the afterlife there were 7 levels. 7 levels. You go through that level. If you are on the bottom level, you go through that level to go up.
Okay, so you don't have the answer
So
to
you
that question.
could,
That's cool.
yeah.
I'm not
I
gonna
do
take
know.
the secondhand stuff from whichever psychic you consulted about things like this. So now I want to take you to the next level here. So now we've acknowledged, right? So we've acknowledged through this dialogue that there can be physiological effects to the brain that affect your behavior, and then your behavior is ultimately what gives you salvation. Now, you are acknowledging that your brain is a source of behavior. Okay? Now, if you're acknowledging that your brain is the source of behavior, why do we even need the soul? Like, how does and that there's a way to damage the interaction between your soul and your brain so that your soul becomes disconnected from your brain? I don't understand how you don't see that as disparate, because I could, let's say, have a small amount of damage in one portion of my brain. If that's enough to disconnect my soul from my brain, and I live the next 80 years of my life with my soul disconnected from my brain, like, am I a zombie at that point in time? Like, how am I operating and functioning if my soul is no longer capable of driving the car? You're basically saying, okay, well, in these instances, the car is driving itself now. The soul is no longer interacting. So what's a human then? Because you're simultaneously acknowledging that we don't need the soul to operate, interact, feel, engage. We don't need that, because you need to be able to segregate the two in order to be able to continue to hold the belief that it's fair that God would condemn people or whatever. So you need to be able to say, okay, well, God wouldn't condemn people because now the soul's separated. But in order for you to hold that belief, then you also have to be able to believe that you don't even need the soul to be able to operate and feel. Like, and animism goes right out the window. You don't need the soul for any of that in that instance, which means that you never needed it to begin with. It's just a weird postulate. Yeah. If they can be separated and we can still function, then it was never needed to begin with, right?
The body won't be able to function without the soul.
But you
Without the
told
soul,
me
the
about
body
the
doesn't-
car, though, bro.
We kind of already established that it
BenDan.
can.
You
That
did.
the mind is all that's needed.
Yeah, right. Like, so you said in Phineas
The-
Gage's
the
instances,
soul-
God would
soul
the
controls
soul,
the
the
mind.
car is damaged. So the soul,
The soul
which
controls
is
the
you,
mind. The soul needs a mind to function.
isn't steering the car anymore. The car is not working in that analogy. It can't be driven properly, right? But
Right.
Phineas Gage still
Right,
existed
right.
and lived a very, very long life. So you either have to accept the
So-
fact that he still had a soul, in which case that soul is condemned, which isn't fair. And then you'd have to admit that it's not fair, or it was never necessary to begin with, and animism, like through the soul, like, is not a requirement. You can't hold both beliefs simultaneously without being dissonant. BenDan,
I got lost. You still
you
hear
got
me?
lost. I can still hear
Okay.
you, but I don't think that you can hold both beliefs simultaneously without being dissonant. And we haven't even gotten to the interaction problem. I mean, I could go right down to the microscopic level and explain to you why a soul doesn't make any sense from the perspective of sodium ion transmission across the cell membrane and a neuron, causing action potentials, and those being required in order for you to even have this conversation and any thoughts pertaining to it right now. And that a soul couldn't be involved in that process in any sort of practical or material way. But I don't even think that's needed.
Yeah. I'm wondering, maybe because I mean, it might be apparent to you at this point that Shannon has really thought about this. I wonder, why you think there's a soul in the first place. I understand that people will tell you that we have a soul. People will tell you that we need a soul. Psychics will tell you about all kinds of stuff, about there being spirits and afterlives and I guess, railroads in those afterlives. But I guess, is there a particular reason why you believe that we have souls in the first place? Like, why do you think this is necessary?
Well, evidence all around us through research, through investigation.
What's the very, very best evidence that you have that we have souls?
Two types of evidence. First one through investigation, visual observation. Second one
visual observation. Okay, let's just talk about that, Ben, because we are running out of time. But let's just drill down on one thing. So the first thing you brought up was visual observation. When has someone visually observed a soul?
I would argue that the opposite.
Well, the difference between you and me is I am a researcher. You are not.
You're the researcher? You researched this?
No, I researched through other researcher and investigator.
Why would you assume that neither of us?
I know what most people know.
BenDan's
nobody knows what I know.
Look, Shannon, BenDan's a researcher. We're just a couple assholes who don't know anything. So that's why I'm asking you, BenDan.
I'm looking at my degree, like what a waste of money.
Okay, a degree, but are you a researcher? So, no. BenDan, who visually observed a soul? Who did this?
Yeah, and what did it look like?
Well, people do investigate the phenomenon.
Okay. I feel like we're going in circles a little bit, BenDan.
Yeah, because I'd want to know what it looked like too. Like because you've acknowledged the fact that brains, you've acknowledged the fact that brains initiate behavior, and that sometimes that's beyond our control. In this conversation, you've acknowledged that fact. So if that's the case, in order to hold true to the soul, you have to find a way for the soul to interact with the brain. And if you're trying to find a way for a soul to interact with the brain, once you acknowledge the brain is responsible for behavior so that the soul can drive that car, then it would be easy to find it. You would be able to see it because we know how neurons fire. Neurons fire because there's a specific distribution of sodium and potassium ions on either side of the cell membrane of the neuron. And when they reach a specific threshold, the mitochondria in that cell produce ATP, and that ATP opens the sodium potassium, opens the channels on the neuron, and they go on to either side of that cell membrane. That creates the electrical action potential that causes that neuron to send a signal down that axon through the fibrous tissue to the dendrites on the other side, on the cell buttons, on the synapse, where the chemicals are released to communicate with the other neurons in the brain. Like, we know that that's a fact. That's something that would be observable. So
did you research it though? I mean,
yes.
All right. Okay.
I did. So we would be able to see that. That would be the point of interaction. But we don't see that happening. Right. So when you say that it's been observed, like a bunch of mystics saying that I can see somebody's fucking aura doesn't do it for me. When you because you haven't even gotten into the realm of the things that you've admitted. Like, you admitted that the brain causes behavior, and that's why Phineas Gage got his special get out of jail free card to get into heaven, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. But you somehow won't admit that the soul doesn't interact with the brain, or isn't required for the brain. So now you're at the point where if you're saying, okay, well, the soul interacts with the brain, it does, it's necessary. You have to prove that it's necessary somehow, and we know the point of interaction where we could find it, and it's not there.
When a car is dead, the driver is outside, no longer be part of the car. Okay, that driver has the capacity to imitate the car.
Yeah, that response, BenDan.
It doesn't have to be the car.
BenDan, that response for me, I muted you, because everything that you're doing right now, it's just like the sound of everything Shannon said thudding into the wall as it went over your head. You're not addressing anything that Shannon said to like the point here. Okay. So I'm going to unmute you so you can do that, because I don't want you to, I know you're a nice person. You wouldn't want to be rude to Shannon and not answer the question.
I understand what Shannon was talking about.
Okay.
Shannon was referring to the car still working. I'm saying about the car no longer part of the spirit. The spirit is more powerful than the car. The spirit can emerge as the car itself.
But
So
I was talking about how the
you-
driver. Well, let's stay in your analogy. I was talking about how the driver drives the car. We can witness how the driver drives the car because we can see the driver's hands on the steering wheel. We can see the driver's feet on the pedals. We can see the driver's hand moving to the gear shift. Those are observable things. That's how we know a driver's driving a car, because we see them doing car drivey things, and we identify, and then we see the car moving. So I was telling you the mechanisms by which the brain does stuff, but we don't see anybody's hands on the wheel. Nobody's hands are on the wheel. You haven't shown me that the driver is even within 100 kilometers of the car.
Well, we don't.
This
we
is a
don't see
self-driving
the
car.
driving.
Prove to me it's not a self-driving car.
see-
Show me the driver in the car.
Right. We don't. We're not talking about the driver and driving the car. We cannot identify the driver and driving the car, but we can see that the driver is outside the car, alive, like the car.
Analogies are hard. Like, yeah.
Because if the driver's
your
outside
spirit- let me say it again. Your spirit emerge out of your dead body, and that spirit can mimic yourself, become your physical, and disappear or come out like Superman.
That is the claim that you're making, that there is this spirit, there's this soul thing. What Shannon keeps drawing attention to is that our brains seem to be doing all of the work, and that there's no indication that a soul is interacting with it at all. There's no mechanism that we have right now that we can use to detect a soul. So what she's asking you, like frankly, like really sweetly and nicely over and over again, is how are you determining that this soul thing is interacting with the brain at all?
Yeah. Because you said it's been observed.
Because the dead body and the soul know each other, right?
And that's the claim, right? That's the claim.
That's why we know that the soul is driving the car. The person is driving the car.
So the claim that you're making is that the soul is driving the car, right? But what Shannon is asking you is, how are you determining that the soul is interacting with the car? Let's forget the car, with people, okay? How are you determining that the soul is in fact interacting with people? You're claiming that the soul is what's driving the person and their behavior. How have you determined that that is the case?
Through research, identifying the soul separate from the car. While the car is dead, the soul still observing everything else, and then become part of the car.
There's no way, BenDan, that there is research that communicated with a dead person's spirit.
What?
and that, because what you're saying is there's research that somehow was capable of talking to a dead person's still existent non-corporeal form, and that dead person said, actually, I totally was a soul this entire time. That's my body right there.
When you
weird, right, guys? Like,
BenDan, when you do, is your research primarily being done on like Google, Facebook, perhaps?
Reddit?
My sources are authentic. So.
Authentic. Okay, I think that we've reached the apex of this conversation.
Yeah, we've hit bedrock. BenDan, have a great rest of your day. Good luck with your research.
Yes, very lovely talking to you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You're not a researcher, Shannon. You're not
a
he is.
I'm not actually, like,
you
I'm not,
are not.
It's not my vocation, but I have done research in a scholastic setting more than
Look,
twice.
I just want to draw attention, like,
But
because
okay.
what I just did there with asking about like Google and Facebook and even places like Reddit, it is
Mm.
possible to actually, do research, good quality research using those types of venues. But all research is not created equally. I'm thinking of that meme about research where there's people in a lab working on medicine and then compared with like somebody on their toilet looking at their phone. These are not equivalent research methodologies, right? So in the same way that we were talking about evidence earlier, people will present lots of things as being evidence, even if it doesn't have the quality of being useful for demonstrating the truth of whatever they're claiming. Just for all of us, recognize that what we are doing when we're looking for information is not always necessarily research, and it's easy to be confused.
Yeah, I think that is a solid point. I was making sense though, right? Sometimes I think, was I saying words that
No,
make
no, yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, with that, we've determined that I sometimes make sense. I hope you all enjoyed our show today.
That's
Kenneth,
our
did you
goal
enjoy
on
it?
here, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes making sense. That's we're doing
So,
good,
Shannon
right?
Q sometimes makes sense. That's how we're gonna put on a shirt. That's probably an overreach, actually. She periodically makes sense every so often. All right. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And we hope you enjoyed the show. Even though Kenneth was here, we did what we could. I'm sorry. It was
That's right.
he's
Still
a lot to work with.
nemesis,
I
clearly.
apologize to
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
we did the best we could with what we had. And as always, everyone, help elevate the discourse. Bye.
Bye.
What will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? You think it's any of your business what goes on between my thighs? I wonder when we'll be rid of your lies.
It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.